victim. It didn't hurt him. He ended up as president of the United States, and now he overturned. He has no outstanding indictments, and now nobody wants him to go after more people.
That's absolutely not what he said.
A very small percentage of the MAGA base will be happy with this.
You're also wrong.
Many people are very concerned about their economic security.
You can do two things at the same time.
Not addressing that.
Donald Trump, and there was a montage played on CNN earlier today. He literally ran off saying there will be accountability for the abuse of power in the deep state, period. He said it by name, James Comey. He said he was a liar by name.
Yeah, well,
he said it in almost every campaign rally. No one should be surprised about today.
Hold on 1 second. Let me just actually play what Trump, to your point, has said over the years about James Comey.
He's a leaker.
One of the best things is firing James Comey's ass out of there.
James Comey, who is a disaster, by the way.
Comey is a corrupt person. Comey is a dirty cop.
Comey should hang his head in disgrace.
Phony, crooked Comey.
Fraud, the worst scum on earth.
So okay.
He ran on it.
Yeah, Trump ran on it. But let me ask you this, Ellie. In the court of law, when James Comey's prosecutors say this is a vindictive prosecution, how is that going to go? Because, I mean, Trump has made it clear, not just in those clips, but literally in the last week, firing personnel who wouldn't bring these charges and bringing someone else who has been there for 5 days to bring them. I don't know. It just seems like a bad fact pattern for these.
There's never been a stronger case of vindictive prosecution than when the president posts it explicitly on social media. I am no Jim Comey apologist or fan. I've been strongly critical of him over the years. This is not a Jim Comey character test. That's not what this is. This is a criminal indictment. They're trying to lock him up. I've also been critical of some of the prosecutions of Donald Trump. Not all of them. This is not okay. This is an endless spiral of retribution. Let's focus on what this is. This is a criminal indictment. I was a prosecutor for 14 years. They're trying to take away a man's liberty. They're going to have to go into court with something better than what I've heard here so far, which is who knows who's telling the truth. They're going to have to go in court and argue, A, Jim Comey's testimony and Andy McCabe's testimony contradict one another, which I do not believe they do. Hold on. You've talked plenty. They contradict each other, which they do not. I do not believe. Two, that Andy McCabe, a friend of mine, I'll say this, okay? We all know him, or many of us know him, but he was found by the Justice Department under Trump to lack credibility, to be not credible. Now they're saying Andy McCabe is unequivocally telling the truth and Jim Comey is unequivocally lying. Some prosecutor, if this case gets to a jury, which I doubt, is going to have to stand up in front of a jury and say, ladies and gentlemen, Andy McCabe is telling you the truth beyond a reasonable doubt.
They're going to have to have proof.
Ellie, you don't think this is
Ellie and Jim, they're going to, it seems to me that you have one person saying one thing, okay? I know you don't think they're contradictory, but even if you argue that they were, the only way to solve that dispute is to bring in new evidence, proving definitively that one person is lying and one person is telling the truth. Do you think, based on the way that this one-page indictment is written, that they have that proof?
We don't know what's before the grand
this
jury,
indictment is literally...
I want to go back to the selective prosecution.
A few words.
You talked about a vindictive prosecution. I don't believe there's going to be a chance of a selective prosecution motion here that would be successful. Do you?
Oh, yeah.
Why? Why don't you believe that?
Sure. I mean, the definition of a selective prosecution is the person was chosen for prosecution for political reasons. I mean, have you seen a stronger argument for that?
The courts just don't favor those.
No, they usually lose. You're right about that.
They usually lose on these.
Yeah.
And I think
usually not a presidential tweet.
When you make a presentation before the grand jury, and if they have facts that bear out that Jim Comey did in fact commit a crime, I think you have a hard time getting to a selective prosecution.
But I was asking you, and you brushed it aside.
We don't know what it is.
Do you believe that they have those facts? And if they don't, do you think that they would need it?
I don't think they do need facts. They do need facts that are going to bear out, that are going to show that he committed the crime. I can't tell you what they presented to the grand jury. Nobody at this table can.
I've talked to several senators tonight, and some on the Judiciary Committee. Full disclosure, I do a show with Senator Ted Cruz. We were literally prepping before this, having multiple conversations. And one of the things I wrote down that I just want to read was this. FBI likely has corroborating evidence it was Comey who is lying. That is coming from somebody that I spoke tonight, a source that said after they've looked through what they've seen, That is what they're leaning towards now. So the idea that this is somehow simplistic or there's nothing there or that somehow this is like, oh, it's just one page, so therefore we should just throw it out.
Was that based on them actually knowing that there's corroborating evidence? Because I think that
based on what they are now going back.
Let me just finish. I think that just observing the facts of this case, it would stand to reason that the only way that they could think that they could actually prosecute this case is if they did, in fact, have that corroborating evidence.
Correct, and that's what I'm saying.
But I'm asking you, does your source actually know that, or are they just speculating?
I'm saying what they have gone through, and the letters that go back December the 10th of 2020, where this all started, and there was back and forth. There was a letter that Senator Cruz put out to General Barr and Director Wray. If you want to read from part of it, you can.
I have it here.
There's a lot more there.
Let me read the key part of it, because I think that this is the relevant part. He wrote this back in December 10th, 2020. He says, so that the American people may know the truth, please provide to the fullest extent possible any and all emails, records, communications, and any other documents relevant to our determination whether Mr. Comey knew of and approved of the FBI's leak of information pertaining to that Clinton investigation. Now, again, he wrote this to the Trump DOJ.
Correct.
The Trump DOJ that had already by that point determined not to bring charges in this case. So I think that it really begs the question, has something miraculously appeared in the last 5 days that has changed the facts of this case? Or is it what appears to be in front of our very eyes, Donald Trump telling his U.S. attorney to prosecute?
I think there was a lot of people in that office that were trying to protect the former FBI director, number one. I also think his son-in-law resigning is a big point of that, where you can say he was
including the U.S. attorney that Trump appointed to that very office?
Let me just say this, and you can make your decision up. You have a son-in-law who has resigned, who is, I'm assuming they're probably not going after his father-in-law. Okay, and is resigned tonight. That is big news that we should talk about. The second thing is this. I think it was a bad move for the FBI director to lie to Grassley and then lie or lie to Grassley or lie to Cruz about the lie. That's what's probably going to get him in the most trouble.
Hold on. You're saying that he's lying, but that is the very thing that is in dispute here. We don't know that he is lying, and he maintains that he is not lying.
I understand that he says that.
If he was, in fact, lying, why on earth would Trump's former Attorney General not have indicted him?
They may not have had the information that corroborates now with the information. That's why I said the statement earlier on the air. Clearly there's something new, and you guys are assuming that nothing changed. No, it could have been there for the last 6 months. And you could have an office.
The prosecutor ignored it.
Okay, I'll go back to what I said a moment ago. You had an office that clearly was protecting the former FBI director, and you had a son-in-law in that office that was clearly protecting, I think it's fair to say, his father-in-law.
Yeah, the word clearly is a lot of work in your statements right now. Well,
again, you have a grand jury that is saying there's enough there.
And your clearlies and your declarative statements mean nothing.
You may not like facts, my friend, but the grand jury is way more on my side than yours right now.
The breaking news tonight, former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted just days after Donald Trump directed his DOJ to charge him. Joining us at the table is Josh Rogan. He's the lead global security analyst at the Washington Post and intelligence and author of Chaos Under Heaven. Josh, as we were just discussing, the big question that's hanging over this case is whether or not the fact that Donald Trump directed this prosecution is going to matter. And also, I think other people are probably wondering what other prosecutions are coming next. I mean, we know it's not just Comey. It's Letitia James, Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, John Bolton, Miles Taylor, Chris Krebs, John Brenner. These are all people that Trump has said he wants to see prosecuted.
Right. Does it matter? Well, I don't think this is the first time a president has intervened in law enforcement. I hearken back to a time when they used to be a little bit embarrassed about it, where they weren't so proud of it. I think that's the norm that's been shattered here. Now they're just doing it out in the open. Remember when Bill Clinton met with Loretta Lynch on the tarmac? It was like a scandal for like 6 months. And that's because that was bad. We thought it was bad for the people under investigation to be politically motivated and for the presidents to intervene in law enforcement. That's all gone now.
Well, but I mean, just to be clear, I mean, Bill Clinton wasn't president at the time.
Exactly.
They had a conversation, and it was just the appearance of a conversation that caused everybody to lose their minds then. Now it's the president sending messages saying prosecute him.
But to your point, it's not really about Comey. James Comey is going to be fine. He's an amazingly successful person with a lot of resources. And there are not just the people that you mentioned, but another 100 people who don't have those resources, who now have to worry about if the Justice Department is going to come after them for criticizing Trump. And those people, if they get indicted, may not be able to afford it. Their careers may be impacted. And then there's another huge group of people that will have a chilling effect. And I think that's the real point of this. It's not really about the indictment itself. It's about the chilling effect it sends to anyone who might want to speak up against Trump. And that chilling effect is real, and it affects a lot of people that names we'll never know. And then, you know, we had all these leaders from the UN here this week, and I was talking to all of them. You know, there are a lot of countries out there where the presidents get to use law enforcement to silence political dissent. The Chinese government does this. The Russian government does this. The Turkish government does this. The Saudi Arabian government. Do we want to be that? Is that what we like? Is that good? Are we going to keep going down that road? Or are we going to have a rule of law where...
I would have loved to have heard this speech from you when Michael Flynn was getting indicted, Rick Gates, George Papadopoulos, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Jenna Ellis, Jeffrey Clark. That was all done under Democrats. And you guys are like, man, I tell you what now, the weaponization. Like, welcome to our world. Congratulations for finally joining us.
But you know it's a straw man because
it's not a straw man when you're holding people accountable for what they did.
Yeah, but that's just...
There's an abuse of power that happened in the last administration. I just gave you the names. And you're acting like they never did it.
Ben, do you think it matters? Do you think that it matters what those people were accused of doing?
I think it matters that you have on the record a former administration that went after people.
Okay, can you answer my question?
I'm answering your question. You just don't like what I'm saying.
Do you think it matters? Does it matter whether or not those people actually did the things that they were accused of doing?
I'll give you a great example of answering this question. When James Comey decided, I'm going to go into the Situation Room and I'm going to hang out with a guy and entrap him.
You could literally just answer that by saying, yes, it matters, no, it doesn't matter.
I go back
to
the
the facts. Do you think it matters?
Well, I think the facts matter.
Do you think that
James Comey,
do you think that
I said this last night,
when Michael Flynn was charged with lying to the FBI, does it matter whether he did it or not?
I think it's pretty clear they knew they were setting him up to lie.
When Roger Stone was charged and convicted of lying to Congress
on live TV,
and lying to Congress,
that was going after a political
does it matter to you whether he lied or not?
I think it should matter when you lie to Congress.
So does it matter to you whether he lied or not?
I think we're talking about that right now with James Comey.
Yes or no?
I just said I think it should across the board.
All right,
but your argument is basically
that
they did something bad, so we can do something bad.
Josh, hang on one second.
If it's bad, it's bad.
I don't even want to go down the road of. I don't even want to go down the road of the false equivalency, because I'm asking you, do you think it matters whether the facts support charges or not?
100%.
Because if
you guys have said at the table tonight that there's no facts for James Comey to be indicted. I'm like, you don't know that.
Hold on a second, Ben. If it matters whether or not the charges are substantiated or not, you would be just as upset about Michael Flynn lying, about Roger Stone lying and then getting pardoned, as you are about the allegation of James Comey lying. Would you not be?
I am angry when anyone uses the government to go after their political opponents the way that the last administration did it.
So that only is a valid argument if, in fact, it was the government just going after people for things they didn't do.
But if they did, in fact,
but if they did in fact commit crimes, do you think they should be prosecuted for it?
If you commit a crime, regardless of party you're in, I think you should be prosecuted.
Okay, well then I think that really answers your question, Ben.
So do you think they entrapped? Do you think James Comey was there to entrap General Flynn? Yes or no?
It's
a simple question. It should matter, but you won't answer that question.
But you're proposing, Abby.
No, hold on.
You think he didn't commit a crime.
Listen,
exactly. You're saying he's innocent, but anyone that would Trump was around is guilty.
Listen, my friends, I am not presupposing anything.
I wish you guys treated Trump that way.
James Comey has not been convicted of a crime. That is actually the presumption of innocence, which I know you know well about.
Sure.
That presumption of innocence, he actually has. We had a whole discussion here about whether or about
change if he's convicted.
It will absolutely change if in a court of law he is convicted. But all we have right now are the facts of the case as we know it.
There are things that we don't.
There are things that we don't know. There are things that we don't know. But just to be clear, the presumption of innocence isn't me giving James Comey a break. It's actually a right that he has in this country. Now, on the other hand, some other people that you were just claiming were, politically persecuted were actually convicted. They were actually convicted.
Are you saying, let me ask you,
so do you think it matters whether or not that those
have you ever condemned, of the whole list they gave you, is there anyone on there you think, hey, you know what, they got a raw deal? I think the last administration went after them for political persecution. Do you think the way they set up Flynn and entrapped him and the way that James Comey got on stage and mocked it, do you not think there's a problem with that?
Your argument
I'm being
is
serious.
You
won't answer the question because you know I'm right on this.
No, the answer is
he got on stage and literally mocked the fact that he was so trusting and didn't call an attorney.
You're just deflecting.
I'm asking a question.
That's
true. Comey is narcissistic.
Either political persecutions are good or bad.
Like to use this idea of entrapment in a way that is totally incorrect. It is not entrapment to ask somebody a question and then they lie in answering that question. That's not what entrapment means.
So you think it was totally above board, even though he literally said it wasn't?
Michael Flynn.
You sent a couple FBI guys in there.
Could have told the truth, and that would have negated this entire thing. So no, that is not actually at all entrapment. End of story on that one. But let's move on first. 1 second, because I want to.
But your argument is essentially we're rubber and they're glue.
No, I'm saying,
which is
when
like
you sit
an
here
argument
and you
made by
act
like
like what we're witnessing right now is
Listen.
like this shocking moment that we can't believe this is
shocking-
happening.
It is a
when
shocking
you
moment.
guys literally went pro in this, we're barely amateurs. You guys are pros.
Hold on a second. I don't have time to play
This
the
is why it's
sound,
so
but I just
mad.
want to add, Charles, that Donald Trump also has now opened up the frontiers of the George Soros Foundation being investigated. So this is not just about James Comey.
Exactly.
There's a long list of political enemies. You were talking about this, but I just want to introduce that because I think it's valid to add to this that Trump is expanding the list of people that he does not like. He's accusing the Soros Foundation, according to the New York Times, of things ranging from arson to material support of terrorism. That is what they're looking at.
Right. And Ben,
On college campuses.
I'm sorry, let me finish. This is why it is so maddening for Americans, because this deflection that you're doing, this false equivalency that you're
pretty
doing.
direct, bro.
No, I'm finished. She asked you a direct question about whether or not, if those things were true, whether or not you'd be upset about it. You went around this studio trying to avoid answering yes or no. To avoid answering yes or no, you ran around this table. That is why it's so maddening, because we have to sit here and watch you
guys responded
jump
to Trump's
through
campaign and said it didn't
you jump
happen.
through hoops.
And you literally were doing it. You're getting FISA warrants. And you knew they were a lie. You literally said the Steele dossier was user-generated at the FBI, and then you weaponized it to go after Donald Trump to have a coup against a sitting president of the United States of America. And you want to lecture me right now about right and wrong? Like, come on, man.
Just because you talk loud does not mean you're right.
No, but that's the facts about the Steele dossier.
Just because you talk loud doesn't mean I'm going to let you continue to talk over me.
The FBI said that the Steele dossier was user-generated, and you used it to go after him.
And then I'll talk.
Go ahead.
Are you finished yet?
I'm just going to correct the record. You guys weaponize the government.
You're destroying the record. You're muddying the waters. You're constantly doing this, and you're destroying.
You tried to overthrow the will of the people with a Steele dossier that you knew was a lie.
Charles did that?
I was here during that time, and it was pretty awesome.
Is political persecution wrong or not?
Let's let somebody answer, and Ben, I'll let you respond. Okay? I promise I will let you respond, but go ahead.
Well, I just don't understand what Trump actually thinks that he has to win out of this. Because if he has to explain it while Americans are losing their jobs, he's not winning. So, the whole circle that you just did, you said if someone is, guilty, then they should be persecuted. If they're not guilty, then they shouldn't. We don't know. Sure. But what's happening here is you guys are setting up a very dangerous precedent. And I'm sorry. You think that we did all of the precedent setting. You think that
you guys went pro in it. And political persecution.
I
Y'all
went
went
President
pro.
Obama. Yeah? You think President Obama set up...
Were they not spying on Donald Trump's campaign?
Oh, my God.
Yes or no? It is a fact that did they get FISA warrants? Yes or no? Oh, so then therefore it must be real, even though it wasn't.
So should we know what Russia is doing? Yes, 100%.
You accused Donald Trump of working with the Russians,
Hold on a
and
second.
you knew it was a lie.
All right, Ben, you lost your chance to respond because I asked you not to intervene, and you did. Listen, let me just ask you, Jim. Hold on, Josh, a straightforward question, okay? Because at the end of the day, it seems like the justification for all of this is that, well, they did it to us first. But at the same time, even if you think all of those other investigations involving Trump-adjacent people were invalid, there is no evidence that they were directed by the president in the way that Trump is directing this. So, is it right to do it just because of the perception that it might have been directed by the prior president?
That I think any prosecutor taking this case would prefer that the president not weigh in on it, because they're the ones that have to go prosecute that case and get a conviction. It makes it harder when he does what he does. That's a fact. Any prosecutor taking that case wouldn't want to hear him saying those things. It makes it harder, and therefore he probably shouldn't do it.
Former FBI Director James Comey has been indicted. This is his reaction just moments ago.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
The president also weighed in online, saying in all caps, "Justice in America," calling Comey, quote, "one of the worst human beings in this country." Judge Shira Shenlin and Jessica Roth are back. Judge, there's a standard to actually bring for a case to actually be brought to a grand jury.
A standard that a prosecutor must meet. So a prosecutor has to believe that they can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The grand jury can find probable cause, but the prosecutor has to be convinced, which is probably why the previous prosecutor wouldn't do it, that there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, we do need to note here that only 14 grand jurors voted for this. Had to be 16 people there because that's a quorum. So they couldn't even get the last two votes. So not all of them even found probable cause for these two counts, and one count they wouldn't indict.
Jessica, I mean, people talk about throughout the American history there being a firewall. Talk about.
Yeah, so at least since the Watergate era, where Americans were shocked by the involvement of high-level Department of Justice officials in misdeeds at the behest of the president, there has been this firewall between the White House and the Department of Justice through White House and Department of Justice policies, so not laws, but policies that were respected, that limited contacts between people at the White House and the Department of Justice about individual prosecutions, so that any sort of information flow between the two entities was cabined through designated officials, and at the White House, that was primarily the White House counsel's office, and then the Department of Justice, it was high-level officials like the Attorney General and her immediate deputies. Here, what we're seeing is just totally blowing through, disregarding that firewall, with the White House, the president himself reaching out and effectively directing individual prosecutions. That is unprecedented in the post-Watergate era. Frankly, I don't know if there's any precedent before, but it is directly contrary to those norms, policies, and that firewall that has been respected up until now.
If that is the case, that would be weaponization.
That, to me, is the definition of weaponization.
As expected, former FBI Director James Comey will surrender to federal authorities tomorrow morning after years of loudly critical public statements by the president. Just days after a presidential tweet calling for Comey's prosecution, he was indicted tonight, as you know, on 2 charges, most notably of giving false statements to Congress. CNN's Caitlin Collins has more now on how Comey's surrender will play out and what could come next. She continues our coverage with The Source. I'll see you tomorrow night.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And we are following major breaking news tonight as former FBI Director James Comey is now the first senior government official to face charges in one of President Trump's biggest grievances, the 2016 Russia investigation. Comey is charged with giving a false statement and obstruction of a congressional proceeding relating to the testimony he gave before the Senate Judiciary Committee 5 years ago. This indictment comes just days after the president publicly demanded it, and shortly after the person the president had picked to be the U.S. attorney in this office quit. And the new U.S. attorney, 3 days into that job, did what the president had wanted to happen only 5 days before the statute of limitations was set to run out. Tonight, the president is celebrating, writing in all caps on Truth Social, quote, "Justice in America," One of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to is James Comey, the former corrupt head of the FBI. Today, he was indicted by a grand jury on 2 felony counts for various illegal and unlawful acts. He has been so bad for our country for so long and is now at the beginning of being held responsible for his crimes against our nation. The president ended his post with "Make America Great Again." This comes as I'm told by sources tonight that James Comey is expected to surrender tomorrow morning. We'll be watching, obviously, that appearance very closely. But the former director of the FBI has already made quite clear tonight that he's prepared to fight these charges.
My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump, but we couldn't imagine ourselves living any other way. We will not live on our knees, and you shouldn't either. Somebody that I love dearly recently said that fear is the tool of a tyrant, and she's right. But I'm not afraid, and I hope you're not either. I hope instead you are engaged, you are paying attention, and you will vote like your beloved country depends upon it, which it does. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent. So let's have a trial and keep the faith.
Comey saying he's prepared for this to go to trial. We'll see if that happens. And of course, this comes after the president had made no secret of his plan to try to make this day happen when he was running for re-election. So much so that I actually asked former Director James Comey about this more than a year ago and whether or not he thought this day would ever come.
Do you believe that Donald Trump will come after you personally if he's reelected?
Maybe. I mean, he spent 4 years coming after me. I think all I ended up with was a $400 tax refund, which is great. I guess I overpaid my taxes. I don't worry about me. I have the resources and the friends, and I know how things work. I can defend myself. I really worry about the people who have less of that than I do, the people making the cases, the career civil servants who are prosecutors and judges who are the bedrock of our rule of law. They are the people who will be most at threat.
I want to get straight to CNN's senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez, who's following this closely. Evan, obviously, we've seen this indictment now. It's just about 2 pages. It's quite brief, actually. As you combed through it, what stood out to you?
Yeah, no, the bare bones nature of this charge, of this indictment, really stands out. And what we know about it, Caitlin, is that Lindsay Halligan, who is the newly installed U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, she is the one who personally presented this to the grand jury. That's not normal. Usually you have career assistant U.S. attorneys who make these presentations to the grand jury. In this case, we know that there were concerns that were raised by the career lawyers in that office who did not believe that this was a case that they could bring to fruition. And so what we have here is 2 counts against the former FBI director, an extraordinary day in American history, of course. But we also know that there was a 3rd count that prosecutors had tried to get approval for that the grand jury rejected. We know that what was rejected, according to the magistrate judge, was a count of false statements in the jurisdiction of a congressional proceeding and obstruction of a congressional proceeding. And so those 2 carry 5-year terms if he is convicted. Of course, we're a long way from there, and we know that Comey, as he says in his video statement there, is planning to fight this. We also have a statement from his personal lawyer, Pat Fitzgerald, who says Jim Comey denies the charges filed today in their entirety. We look forward to vindicating him in the courtroom. And so that process begins tomorrow in earnest, as your reporting indicates. He's going to be surrendering in the federal court there in Alexandria. And then we'll see how this case fares before a judge and before eventually perhaps a jury.
Yeah, and so since he's expected to surrender tomorrow, I just think for everyone watching, there are some people complaining on the right that he's not being arrested. The agents aren't showing up at his house to arrest him as a result of this. What is tomorrow going to look like? What are you going to be watching for as the next steps happen here over what was so clearly telegraphed by the president himself here?
Yeah, look, I mean, your reporting, which indicates that he's going to be allowed to surrender, is actually a very big deal because, as you pointed out, people on the right, they want him picked up like Roger Stone was and other people were. And look, what usually happens in these cases, in normal cases, is that someone who, like him, is not a flight risk, is not believed to have any plans to flee, is given the opportunity to surrender themselves. And so that is being handled in the normal course that it is. They've been in touch with his lawyers and they know what is going to happen. Now, we expect that he's going to be released on his own recognizance, and then this trial will begin, this case will begin in earnest. Here's the thing. The fact that the President of the United States has made so crystal clear what he wants in this case has done some damage. And, you know, the briefs from Pat Fitzgerald and the lawyers kind of write themselves, right? Because the President has made clear that he was ordering this prosecution. And we know from our own reporting and what's out there that prosecutors in the office had some concerns. We also know that Lindsay Halligan, who was just brought there in the office, was the one who had to personally present this case to the grand jury. So all of that stuff will come rushing back as part of the story, as part of the case, as this goes forward.
Yeah, Evan Perez, as you learn more, obviously, throughout the hour, we'll check back in with you and our team. Thank you for that reporting.
Sure.
My legal sources are here tonight. We've got Elliot Williams, Judge Jill Convisor, and Ellie Honig, three of the best voices on this. And Elliot Williams, I want to start with you because I just want to read some reporting from my colleague, Caitlin Polantz, who says that a court record has made public what the grand jury voted no on, what Evan was just referencing there in terms of a potential third charge here, and it was on another alleged false statement to Congress. As Caitlin notes in her reporting here, she says that's a very unusual occurrence in the federal court system. And this is not part of the indictment, but according to the record, it pinpoints Comey's answer when he was asked about an alleged plan from Hillary Clinton during the 2016 campaign. He had testified to Lindsey Graham back in 2020, given this was 5 years ago, people probably don't recall this, that didn't ring any bells with him. Graham had told him about this alleged plan, about distracting from her use of an email server. It is something that obviously conservatives have talked about at length. And I wonder what you make of the fact that the grand jury said yes on 2 of these charges, but no on that third charge there.
Right. It's a notable occurrence anytime the grand jury does not reject a charge. Now, it's certainly not a rubber stamp for the work of prosecutors, but for the most part, when prosecutors go to the grand jury, they come back with charges. Now, what it appears, I think the logical conclusion to draw from it is that the grand jury simply did not believe there was probable cause to find that the offense was committed. Now, there might have been evidence to suggest that Jim Comey had knowledge there, but really, what needed to be established was that he knew his statement was false and still made it anyway. That is the big wrinkle here and is going to apply across all the other charges in this case. Not simply that there was a statement that people didn't like or that was ambiguous or had some gray area, but that he knew he was making a falsehood, a material falsehood, and still went ahead and made it anyway. Those can sometimes be hard to prove, and I would assume that the grand jury just assumed they didn't have it here.
Well, Ellie Honig, what's your take on that, given, as Caitlin Polantz, who knows the justice system well and the federal court system well, she says it's unusual. Just how unusual is it?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to lose even one count in a grand jury, Caitlin, and that shows me that prosecutors already have overextended and have already been called out to an extent by the grand jury rejecting that one count. Now, stepping back to the actual indictment, when Donald Trump put up his social media post over the weekend, it was a line that was crossed. We had a president directly ordering DOJ to indict one of his political opponents. Then we saw other indicators that there might be problems with this indictment. The fact that it went nearly to the end of the 5-year statute of limitations on an area that's been looked at exhaustively and nobody has seen fit to charge it. The fact that the sitting U.S. attorney who Donald Trump put in place, an experienced prosecutor, had problems with the case. The reported fact that Todd Blanche had problems with this case. I was willing to keep an open mind and give it the benefit of the doubt. And when this indictment came out, this thing is decrepit. This thing is, I don't think, going to reach a jury. And if it does, I think they're going to reject it. It all comes down to this allegation that Jim Comey lied when he said that he had not authorized a leak. And what this does is it pits Jim Comey's word on the one hand against Andy McCabe's word on the other hand. The government is going to have to prove that Andy McCabe is telling the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. This isn't just a he said, he said. They're going to have to carry their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. And I also want to add, it's possible that neither of them was lying, because this is going to get in the weeds for a minute, but I'm going to show you why this indictment is going to fail. Jim Comey said, I did not authorize the leak. Andy McCabe said, I authorized the leak and told Jim Comey about it the day after. Those could both be true. In other words, Jim Comey could have said, I didn't authorize the leak in advance. If he learns about it after, that's not necessarily authorizing it. So it's possible that neither of them is lying. This indictment is indecipherable. It's a mess. I'd be shocked if it gets to a jury and if a jury ends up convicting beyond a reasonable doubt.
And Ellie, that's a really crucial point, because essentially you're saying that could it be a, ask for forgiveness instead of permission situation. But what you're talking about there, and where Andrew McCabe, who was Comey's deputy at the time, revealed that was in an inspector general investigation, an independent watchdog investigation that was done under the Trump administration when Trump was in office the last time.
Exactly, in 2018. And again, it is quite possible, if you're the boss of an organization and somebody comes to you and says, hey, boss, I authorized the leak after the fact, right? So someone comes to you and says, hey, boss, yesterday I authorized the leak. Would you consider that to be you as the boss authorizing it? I wouldn't. I would say, well, I didn't authorize that. So they could both be telling the truth here. And yes, this whole incident has been studied in depth. There's a long report from the OIG, the Inspector General of the Justice Department in 2018. John Durham, who was desperate to indict anybody in his special counsel investigation, looked at this and did not return indictments. There's a reason that everybody has passed on this up till now.
And that was John Durham, who was put in that position by Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general. And so obviously that has raised so many questions here. Judge, I have to get your take, because as Ellie described it as decrepit, I'm sure the Justice Department might take issue with that. But when you look at the indictment, it's 2 pages. Count 1 not only charges Comey with making a false statement, but this is the language for people who haven't read it. It says he willfully and knowingly made a materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statement. Some people might see that and say, that reads like a Truth Social post. Is that typical language in an indictment to you?
It is. It can be typical. They generally track the language of the statute, the federal statute, and then try to put in bare bones when they don't have to put more than they have to put in. And they did that here. And they are referring with that language to whether or not McCabe was told to be an anonymous source about this information. So I don't think the indictment itself tells us all that much. What will tell us, or at least what a judge will hear, a judge is going to review the grand jury minutes. They will review the process. They will review the evidence before the grand jury. They will read and see what the evidence was, what the witnesses said, to determine whether or not that with which was presented to the grand jury was appropriate. There's an expression, you can indict a ham sandwich. And it's true, there's almost no occasion where a prosecutor goes in where a case doesn't end up with a true bill. It does happen, but it's rare. The fact that 1 or 2 counts were tossed out here doesn't tell me all that much. What tells me more is that this case is 5 years old. It has been looked at every which way, and that it took a threatening Truth Social post by the president to get a brand new U.S. attorney with no experience to go in and present this case. So a judge is going to look at this with the microscope they should and make a determination whether what was presented to the grand jury was appropriate to reach what is a very low standard before the grand jury. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and Elliot, the judge mentions what the president posted over the weekend. I think there's some confusion over this. Yes, he posted it. He did delete it, but then he reposted it with more added on, essentially. But I also want everyone to listen to what President Trump said in his own words this weekend about the case.
I just want people to act. They have to act, and we want to act fast. You know, they were ruthless and vicious. I was impeached twice. I was indicted 5 times. It turned out to be a fake deal, and we have to act fast. One way or the other. One way or the other. They're guilty. They're not guilty. We have to act fast. If they're not guilty, that's fine. If they are guilty, or if they should be charged, they should be charged. And we have to do it now.
Elliot, the view from people that I've spoken with is, well, look how many times Trump was prosecuted and people charged him. Like either he'll be guilty or he won't be. I wonder what you make of that mindset that a lot of Trump's allies have tonight.
Perfectly fine for them to have that view. The president there, however, just put on a clinic for how to get a case tossed out for being a malicious or selective prosecution. He brought in a number of factors that have nothing to do with the four corners of the case. Number one, going after Jim Comey's character. Number two, talking about the speed with which he hopes that prosecutors act. Number three, directing the attorney general, in effect, in a statement to bring a case. All of those factors suggest some level of leaning on the attorney general to bring the matter. Now, to be clear, most defendants come forward with selective prosecution claims and don't win because they don't have evidence like we just saw from the president here. This is remarkable, this level of, I don't know what the verb to use is, but suggestion to the Attorney General of the United States to bring a prosecution. You really don't see that. Also, talking about the speed with which he hopes that they act. There was one quote in your reporting earlier, Caitlin, that, prosecutors should just bring the best that they have and just get it to the grand jury and let the court sort it out. Well, that's not the standard for bringing a case. So he's really, every time he opens his mouth about the case, he's really jeopardizing his own prosecutor's chance of succeeding in the prosecution that he seems to want to happen.
Before the news broke tonight of James Comey's indictment, the president was asked in the Oval Office today about the possibility of it happening.
I can't tell you what's going to happen because I don't know. You have very professional people headed up by the Attorney General and Todd Blanche and Lindsay Halligan, who's very smart, good lawyer, very good lawyer. They're going to make a determination. I'm not making that determination. I think I'd be allowed to get involved if I want, but I don't really choose to do so. I can only say that Comey's a bad person. He's a sick person. I think he's a sick guy, actually. He did terrible things at the FBI. And but I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen.
It stood out to me that he mentioned the Deputy Attorney General and the new acting U.S. Attorney in this position there. He did not mention the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, but later we saw her in the Oval Office with the President, both the President and the Attorney General, when they declined to weigh in when they were asked by a reporter.
There could be an indictment on James Comey. Do you know if there is an indictment or Madam Attorney General?
I don't know. I know it's going on because I read the papers just like you do, right? So I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that?
We can't comment on that.
Pam Bondi said there she could not comment. I do want to bring in someone for a comment tonight, the former Justice Department prosecutor who also previously represented President Trump in his classified documents case. Jim Trusty is here. And Jim, obviously you were a former prosecutor for a long time in the Department of Justice. Do you believe this decision to charge James Comey was reached independently of what the president has so clearly conveyed he wanted to happen here?
Well, probably. I mean, you do have a grand jury that indicted. They carefully considered the case. They actually shaved it down to an area that makes a lot of sense. You know, nobody's actually talking about the specifics of his false statement, but this was a director of the FBI who had a special employee designed for one purpose, to leak things to the New York Times. Now, when he was pressed in Congress on whether or not he had leaked something, he had authorized the leak of a memo he retained wrongfully at his house, he said, no, that's not my recollection. They challenged him about McCabe, another guy who had referrals to the Inspector General for lying. And Comey said, that's not my recollection. So in a weird way, through all this chaos, through all this kind of political interest of what's going on behind closed doors, who knew what, at the end of the day, the indictment that's left is actually pretty simple. He either lied about leaking to the New York Times in a tantrum because he is getting fired, or he didn't. And I don't think it's going to lend itself to the easy dismissals that some of your other folks have been saying they're going to get.
I believe it was Wall Street Journal, but here's the reason that everyone's raised this question is basically Ted Cruz had questioned him at this hearing 5 years ago and said, you're saying one thing, your deputy is saying another in terms of what you authorized to be leaked to the media and leaked to reporters. And he was saying his recollection was right. And then Andy McCabe testified to an inspector general that basically he told Comey after the fact that he had released that information to a reporter. And so I think that is really the question here in terms of that, but also just the overtly, the overt pressure campaign coming out of the White House. I mean, do you not think that that is in itself unusual here?
Well, I think there's a lot that's unusual. I don't envy Lindsay Halligan being put into the storm, but I don't really think that Lindsay is the one that's necessarily making all the decisions here. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors at the U.S. Attorney's Office. We don't know how long the Deputy AG and AG have been on this matter, deciding whether or not they think it's a case. And let me just tell you, there's different things. Selective prosecution and vindictive prosecution are two separate things. But at the end of the day, if you're able to point to an Inspector General report and say, hey, look, here's the Inspector General specifically saying Comey set a dangerous example for 35,000 FBI employees because he wrongly leaked information to the New York Times that he shouldn't have even possessed. That's their finding in that investigation. And so if you have witnesses that are locked in, if you've talked to the special employee, maybe you've even talked to the New York Times. I mean, there may be ways of proving this case quite nicely at Comey's expense. And before, we relegate him to Patrick Henry status for being such a patriotic hero, let's remember his little seashell shenanigans where a former director of the FBI makes fun of killing the president.
Well, and you could say that that was wrong and you thought it was in bad taste. That doesn't mean he should be indicted, right?
Well, he wasn't indicted for the seashells. He was indicted for lying to Congress as a chief law enforcement officer.
Can I ask you?
No, I'm just saying,
let's
not pretend he's a saint at this point.
I don't think anyone is. Obviously, people who Hillary Clinton voters would not say that. But you just mentioned Lindsay Halligan. Obviously, you and Lindsay Halligan both represented Trump on his personal defense team outside of the White House. What do you mean that you don't think that this was necessarily her decision?
Well, I look, this is not something where she's going to come in and say, I don't want to hear from others. I mean, odds are that for a high-profile case like this, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and perhaps many people around them, including some senior people from Eastern District of Virginia, have been talking about this case for a while. There was 4 years of silence when Garland was the AG, and there was not a snowball's chance in hell of Comey facing trouble. But in terms of the last 6 months, there's probably been a lot of robust conversation about the good, the bad, and the ugly of indicting James Comey. So I'm not really prepared to assume that this was just this imperial moment of Lindsay Halligan announcing from on high she's going to indict it no matter what the evidence is. I think there's probably a lot of authors of this indictment besides the person that signs it, which is typical.
Do you think you would have brought this case?
I don't know enough about it. I mean, look, what I can tell you is the Inspector General report from August of 2019, and by the way, I have to give the date because Comey had like 5 negative Inspector General reports for abusing his position and violating DOJ policy, including what he did with Hillary Clinton. I mean, the common denominator for everything that gets him in trouble is hubris. He writes books. He finds seashells. He announces that there's a tyrant in the White House. This guy thinks he's much taller than he is. And the bottom line is that invites this type of problem. But when I look at the Inspector General report, I think there's at least a valid basis for getting the indictment. How it plays out at trial, how it plays out in terms of pretrial motions, I don't know yet, but we'll see.
I just think everything you mentioned there doesn't mean he lied to Congress or that they'll be able to secure a conviction. But I do want to ask, because in 2020, you warned that prosecutors should be dedicated to the truth, not looking for high-profile skins and acting out of political animus. The president made very clear here that he wanted this to happen. I mean, he explicitly said it over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, look, can any of us be surprised that a guy who went through 4 years of insanely weaponized DOJ, including Comey at the helm, would have some animus towards him? Of course he has some animus towards him. What I was actually heartened to see, and you played big chunks of the clips here, is him kind of backing. No, but let me just say, he also modified a lot of this to say, hey, I've got people at DOJ making this decision. I just think Comey's a bad guy. Look, from everything I've seen about Jim Comey and from FBI agents that I talk to, and I'm talking about a lot of people that are former agents that are around for a long time, they realize that Comey did lasting damage to the FBI and his behavior, his ambush interviews of Flynn, his little jokes on the beach, his condescending and obnoxious behavior, even in the Hillary Clinton situation, where he, as a former deputy attorney general, had no business going out there and talking about that case at all. But this is a guy who injects himself into the spotlight because he thinks he's so important. So, at the end of the day, it's hard to shed a crocodile tear for him, even if there's open questions about the process.
Court records show that he is expected to be arraigned in federal court in Alexandria on October 9th. We're obviously following closely to see, as these negotiations are shaking out, when he is going to appear and where, as prosecutors are accusing Comey of authorizing a leak to the media about an FBI investigation of Trump via an anonymous source, but that Comey later told the Senate he had not done so. This is Ted Cruz pressing Comey on all of this 5 years ago.
What Mr. McCabe is saying and what you testified to this committee cannot both be true. One or the other is false. Who's telling the truth?
I can only speak to my testimony. I stand by what the testimony you summarized that I gave in May of 2017.
So your testimony is you've never authorized anyone to leak. And Mr. McCabe, if he says contrary, is not telling the truth. Is that correct?
Again, I'm not going to characterize Andy's testimony, but mine is the same today.
Joining me tonight is the Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, who is on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Senator, it's great to have you here tonight. I just wonder what your reaction is to this indictment.
Well, Caitlin, thanks for a chance to be on with you tonight. What matters most to me about where we are tonight with this federal criminal indictment of the former FBI director is how we got here. It was just a few days ago that President Trump posted on Truth Social a demand that Attorney General Bondi move ahead with prosecuting James Comey, claiming he's, quote, guilty as hell, unquote, and demanding action now. When the serving U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, someone who'd been nominated by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate, was fired and replaced by Lindsay Halligan, someone with no prosecutorial previous experience, and then she brought forward these charges to a federal grand jury and got an indictment. That to me is a very chilling process that shows the president directly involved in using the tools of the Department of Justice to go after people that he has long identified as a personal political enemy. There's others that he has also called to be investigated and prosecuted. And to the extent he's demonstrated now that if you won't go along with it, he'll get you fired and get you replaced, even with someone who has no prosecutorial experience, is a chilling suggestion that will go back to the days before Watergate, before the 70s, where there's no barrier, no wall between the White House and the very powerful machinery of the U.S. Department of Justice.
Yeah, the president's pressure is plain for everyone to see in terms of what he has said and when. But given a grand jury brought this indictment, do you believe there's merit to these charges whatsoever?
Well, that's something that's going to be worked out in federal court. But it's important to remember that the cost to Jim Comey of defending himself is going to be significant. The risk to his reputation, to his family, the cost of posing a real defense is also going to have a chilling effect on others who are concerned about what might happen to them, their families, and their careers if they were to face investigation and indictment, even if they're convinced they're innocent. A lot of what President Trump has done now for months is to use the power of the presidency and the federal government to go after people. It's long been said that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. An indictment is in and of itself not proof of guilt or innocence. There are reports in the press that the career federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia would not sign off on this, but we don't know that for sure. And what's going to matter most is how the case is presented and what a jury decides.
As a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, what questions do you have for the Attorney General on this?
Well, Attorney General Bondi, when she came before us for her confirmation hearing, said she wasn't interested in retribution, that she wasn't going to be leading the Department of Justice through the rearview mirror, looking back at the challenges and the charges that President Trump faced. She instead was going to focus on protecting the American people, on fighting crime, and on moving forward. The interplay between President Trump, his demands for a prosecution of Jim Comey, and then these results suggest that she's not keeping the promises she made to us on the Judiciary Committee.
When you see this in terms of obviously we'll see how this goes forward. There were questions about whether or not she was on board with moving forward with this. She posted tonight about accountability under the law. I do think there are questions tonight, though, just about the president often said that his success in office would be his retribution that he talked about on the campaign trail. Is that how you see this tonight?
That's certainly how it seems to me, Caitlin, is that he is carrying through on his many, many threats on the campaign trail to wreak vengeance and to exact retribution against the folks he perceives as his political enemies. Let's be clear, Jim Comey has his detractors among the Democratic Party, too, folks who were big supporters of Hillary Clinton's. And there were things he did as FBI director that were controversial. What I'm focusing on here is the process that got us here, the very public threats by President Trump to his own attorney general to use the tools of the Department of Justice to go after former FBI Director Jim Comey because he dislikes him, he thinks he's his political opponent and someone who deserves to be prosecuted. In the United States, you shouldn't be able, as the president, to go after people individually and use the power of the Department of Justice in this way.
And Jeff, I just wonder, based on what we were hearing from the president earlier on this indictment and whether or not it was coming, we all kind of seem to believe it was, and what he's saying now, what stands out to you?
Well, I mean, I'd like to ask more questions about what he knew ahead of time. He was saying in both of the Q&As with reporters today in the Oval Office that he wasn't aware of what was going on with the indictment. But it's just important to follow that up with the fact that he very, very recently pressured Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, to do this and to take on other enemies that he has. I thought it was really interesting, the clip that you just played in terms of retribution. That has absolutely not been the guiding force, what he said, in terms of success instead of going after his enemies for the last several months that he's been in office. And tonight is exhibit A or B or C or D or down to Z of that. I mean, this is a really significant move. And what's led to it has been his sense of grievance that has really powered a lot of the actions that he's taken and that he's encouraged his administration to take.
Jasmine, what sticks out to me is that when I have spoken with people in the last 36 hours about this, is that they're not even trying to focus on the Comey allegation about him lying to Congress or the obstruction about when it comes to leaking to reporters when he was the director. They've really just focused, to me, that, well, Trump was prosecuted by people, and so now it's their turn to go through what he went through, the lawfare and the legal fees and dealing with all of this. I wonder if that's what you've heard from your sources or what you've heard from them.
Yeah, I think that sense of fairness, retribution has been a huge component of what I've heard from my sources. I think one interesting thing is that we know from talking to sources that were following the prosecution earlier today that that indictment came about around 5 o'clock, but that is when we were asking the president whether or not he believed an indictment were to come. That's actually when he actually prompted Pam Bondi. And so what you're hearing is definitely that sense of fairness from the White House and from folks around the White House. I think really one interesting thing here, Caitlin, is that President Trump seemed so trying to be really far removed from whether or not an indictment could come down, but obviously he celebrated it just after that. And so I think that yes, you're hearing a sense of fairness from sources, but also now a sense of celebration that justice has finally come, and that actually has been brought by Pam Bondi.
And Jeff, the thing that you were getting at with the president today was this doesn't appear to be the end of the road here. I mean, we've already been talking about potential charges against John Bolton. Today, he was signing that memo directing the Justice Department and the FBI to investigate groups that they accuse of aiding political violence. You had actually pushed him on that, Jeff. I want people to listen to what he said to you.
So that we can just explain this in our stories, could you name a couple?
You don't explain it right, though, Jeff. Go ahead, let's go. Maybe let's give you another chance. Go ahead.
Antifa, Soros, What names are we talking about?
Well, Soros is a name certainly that I keep hearing. I don't know, but Soros is a name that I hear. I hear a lot of different names. I hear names of some pretty rich people that are radical left people. Maybe I hear about a guy named Reid Hoffman. Somebody's a pretty rich guy, I guess, and I hear about him.
Jeff, when you heard that, what did that say to you?
Well, I mean, just sort of the backstory on that question. The president signed an executive order today, or a memo, or I can't remember what, an executive action of some kind about political violence and going after groups or left-wing groups that they feel are leading to that or generating it. And we just wanted some examples. In part because we're talking here about retribution, and yet they're also sort of framing this particular action as this is good for the country, or this is trying to prevent violence from happening. And yet the examples that they're giving are clearly thought out, and the president delivered in some ways in an answer because he listed some specific names. I've spoke to a couple other administration officials who are certainly convinced that this order, along with the rest of the work that they're doing, is meant to really crack down on a broader problem. But it all sort of feeds back to that grievance that I was referring to earlier, which is sort of driving his activity in this and in the Comey indictment and many more.
Jasmine, is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can take Pam Bondi's words as really bond here. She said when I asked her about the report that justice officials asked attorneys to look into that George Soros-backed group, she said, I can't comment on the specifics, but everything is on the table. And I think that the White House and the Department of Justice really means that when it comes to this idea of retribution, that they're going to kind of scour far and wide to, one, fulfill Donald Trump's pledge to bring retribution to his enemies, but also that they're going to try to do this in a way that potentially positively affects Republicans.
Just breaking news now. A federal grand jury has indicted former FBI Director James Comey on charges of giving false statements and obstruction of justice. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has just confirmed that news on social media. Joining me now, Caitlin Polantz. Well, this happened, Caitlin, as you know, just days after President Trump quite publicly said he wants his attorney general and the Justice Department to prosecute some of his former enemies. What do we know about these charges?
Well, Jim, we don't know that much. We do know, though, that there are two, and that a federal grand jury has approved this indictment against the former FBI Director Jim Comey. What our producer, Hannah Rabinowitz at the Justice Department, has been able to confirm is that this indictment happened today, and that it is two charges. One would be giving false statements or perjury, lying of some sort, and then obstruction of justice. We don't know the exact behavior, the exact answers Comey may have given regarding those alleged false statements, but that would be what the case is, and it is something that not just the Justice Department has wanted, not just that Donald Trump politically has wanted, but something that would have been reviewed between 12 and 23 grand jurors in secret proceedings today, and that they would have asked to vote and say yes to the fact that there may be probable cause to indict Jim Comey. So that is where we are now. It will now set off an extraordinary case that will have to be road tested by a judge and that potentially could be looked at by a jury. Also will be able to be challenged by Comey himself, his defense attorneys. We did reach out to them, and they do not have a comment at this time. They have heard very little, if anything at all, from the Justice Department. There is also a statement from the Attorney General on social media talking about the Justice Department following the facts and the law, but not mentioning Comey by name. Jim?
Now, a grand jury does not have to be unanimous when it indicts. We don't know. Do we know what the vote was for these charges?
No, and we will never know. That is how grand juries work. They are confidential, and there are laws that govern that. The way that the vote works, it will be recorded. The grand jury transcripts is something that Comey's defense team may be able to get access to at some point. But as far as how the vote goes, that is not something that you get to see. At the end of the day, what we will get to see, and potentially very soon today, maybe even tomorrow, we should be able to see court documents, what that indictment says, how prosecutors wrote it and articulated it for the grand jurors to look at, and then for the grand jurors, if they voted yes as a quorum, which we know they did now, to indict him, what they signed off on. So those court records will spell out quite a lot, and that's going to be very important because not only will it show the indictment of Jim Comey, what the alleged behavior is, where the prosecutors believe they can hold him to account in court, it will also show what statutes, what criminal statutes he is being charged with, and the potential consequence if he were to be found guilty at the end of the day.
We should remind people that James Comey has been a target of this president's going back to the first administration, and he's not the only target. We have reporting that John Bolton might be subject to prosecution as well. That's the concern here, is it not, that there's a political dimension to these prosecutions?
There is enough political conversation for it to become a dimension of these prosecutions. Absolutely. Yeah. Something we may even hear about in court from Comey's defense attorneys as they challenge this, that Donald Trump has been calling publicly, the person atop the executive branch, calling publicly for the attorney general to prosecute his political enemies, including Comey himself. That was the social media post over the weekend. Today in the Oval Office, he said Comey is a bad person, a bad man, and that the people at the Justice Department would have to make the decisions there. We also know that there were prosecutors on this case who had concerns about it and wrote down those concerns on paper. Something else that Comey's legal team may get access to in the course of a case. The Bolton situation, that's a little bit different according to the sources that I'm talking to. That is more of a question of timing, where the Justice Department leadership, the Deputy Attorney General's office, they wanted an indictment by the end of the day tomorrow to placate the president, potentially for his political wishes. But John Bolton has not been charged yet, and we do understand that there is a fair amount of evidence, at least, that's been collected in the case from the searches of his home and his office, and that there is the possibility of a case still on the horizon, maybe not by tomorrow, but later in the year.
President Trump's effort to prosecute political enemies. Attorney General Pam Bondi posting on social media just a couple of moments ago here as this news is breaking as we speak. She posted, "No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case." Again, that's from the Attorney General Pam Bondi. And a source tells us now that Comey has been charged specifically with two things, giving false statements, so lying to Congress, and that testimony, you may remember that exchange with Ted Cruz, lying to Congress, and charging him with obstruction of justice. So we understand these are the two charges. I'm saying this as we understand. This is our reporting. We do not yet have the official charging documents in hand, awaiting those any second, but those are the two charges as we understand them. So I want to get straight to Evan Perez in Washington. Evan, what are you learning about this right now, breaking right now as we're awaiting those charging documents?
Yeah, exactly, Aaron. What we do know is that there are two counts that he was charged with, that he's been indicted on by the grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia. And one of them is the false statements charge. Presumably that has to do with his congressional testimony. And the second is an obstruction charge, and that has to do with obstruction of a congressional proceeding. And again, these are the two charges that we know of at this point. Again, we haven't read the documents yet because they have not been provided yet by the Justice Department. So this is basically what we know from sources telling our Hannah Rabinowitz, who's at the Justice Department at this moment. Aaron, this has been a whirlwind day, obviously, and a historic day. We've never had an FBI director indicted for crimes in this country before, and we certainly have never seen a situation like this where the President of the United States has been essentially campaigning publicly to have this person indicted because he believes that he is a political enemy. So that's part of the context of what we're dealing with here today. We do know that prosecutors went into the grand jury in Alexandria today, and a couple hours after being in there, we saw the grand jurors leave the courtroom this afternoon. We had our reporters there on scene, and so the question was, what happened in the vote? So now we know that they indicted on these two counts. We don't know what else happened. We don't know who presented the case, Aaron, because one of the questions today was, whether prosecutors in that office would actually go forward with presenting a case that they themselves had concerns over, had doubts over. Aaron.
All right, so Evan, as we await this, and I think that's a really crucial question I just want to ask you, because we know the president had posted himself on his own social media website over the weekend, that he had fired the person that he'd actually appointed in the Eastern District of Virginia, who would have been in charge of making this decision, because that individual did not think that he had a case. And then he said he's going, suggested to Pam Bondi, Lindsay Halligan is a really good lawyer. We can't delay any longer. Lindsay Halligan is now in that job. Obviously, this just took a couple days for all that to happen. But these documents were obviously ready very quickly. So is there anything you can read in those tea leaves?
Right, well, exactly. I mean, Lindsay Halligan is the third U.S. attorney in that district since Friday. He fired Eric Siebert on Friday in part because Siebert had been objecting to a particular case, including the case of Tish James, that they have an investigation for alleged mortgage fraud allegations. And the prosecutors in the office had objected to it, in part because they say they didn't have any evidence for it. And that's the reason why he fired Eric Siebert. He later said that it was because Siebert had the support of 2 Democrats, but that really is not part of the reason. We do know that over the weekend he had appointed the White House had appointed another prosecutor, Maggie Cleary, to take over the office. And then the president announced that he was sending his former personal attorney, Lindsay Halligan, to take over. She was sworn in on Monday and has been getting briefed. We know that over the last couple of days, Aaron, Lindsay Halligan has been at the Justice Department. We've known that she's met with the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. This has been front and center as part of those conversations. We know that the Attorney General herself had some of the misgivings about this case, in part because those prosecutors, the career lawyers in that office, believe that there were some deficiencies, right? Again, what we're told is that they viewed this case as certainly one that could be brought, but that there were enough deficiencies that it raised some concerns there. Clearly, they've gone to the grand jury now, and they've gotten at least 2 counts approved by the grand jurors. And now we will get to a trial, right? This is a case that obviously will be some time in the making. We expect that Comey's attorneys will quickly go to the judge and say this is a case of malicious prosecution, because the president of the United States has kind of helped them really write that brief, right? That is something that they are going to be able to make. They're going to go to the court. And look, those motions almost never succeed. They're very difficult to bring. But in this case, the president of the United States has sort of made it a lot easier for them.
So, Evan, if this were to go to trial, and as you say, those efforts to have it perhaps not go to trial would ordinarily be a very high hurdle we'll see in this case. But if it were to go to trial, in the context of what you said, that we've never had an FBI director in the United States indicted for a crime, and here we are making history in that regard, what would the punishment be if convicted for the crime, in this case, of lying to Congress and obstruction of justice?
Right, these are serious charges. I mean, these are felonies. These would definitely carry at least a 5-year. They would carry a 5-year maximum sentence under federal law. Now, we don't know that would actually be what a sentence would bring, obviously, because Comey has never been charged with anything before. He's never committed a crime that we know of it before. So, it's not likely that that's what's going to happen, and we're a long way from that, right? I mean, that's what the statutory maximum is for these charges. But look, this is a very serious case, and these are very serious charges that are being brought against the former FBI director, and this is something that has been investigated for some time. John Durham, who was a special counsel during the first term of President Trump under Bill Barr, had looked at some of these very allegations, looked at some of this testimony, and came away deciding not to bring a case. Clearly, the Justice Department in the Trump second term has taken another look, and they've come away with a different view, and they've done so with just days to spare. Keep in mind that the statute of limitations were expiring on Tuesday, and this grand jury today was their final day before the next grand jury would have been sitting would have been on Tuesday, Aaron, which would have been exceedingly close to that deadline. Remember, this testimony occurred on September 30th. In 2020, if you see that video, that's during the COVID period, right? And Comey was testifying remotely from his home in Virginia.
Absolutely, as we have seen. I'm going to play again in just a moment. Evan, thank you very much. Of course, and everyone can see him there for that testimony. As Evan gets more, he's going to come back to us. I will just say, Evan, as you're here, and Elena Trine is at the White House, going to be joining us in just a moment. We did get a statement from the Department of Justice, although we do not yet have those court documents. But in it, Lindsay Halligan, now the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, who, as Evan was just laying out, is the one who brought these charges, says the charges as alleged in this case represent a breach of the public trust at an extraordinary level. They are noting, as you heard Evan just reporting, that if convicted, Comey faces up to 5 years in prison. Elena Trine is at the White House. And Elena, this is clearly, it could not be more clear. This is something Trump has said again and again and again that he wants, as recently as this weekend in his post when he talked about bringing charges against several individuals, including Jim Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, and Letitia James. What are you learning about the Comey charges here?
Yeah, look, this is something we know that the president has been wanting, and he hasn't just been urging this. This isn't just, reporting that we have, which we do, which is that he has been pressuring and urging the Attorney General Pam Bondi to bring these charges against Comey. He said it publicly in that post over the weekend. But one thing that I think is important to make clear and the context around this. We know that behind closed doors, and I know this, Aaron, from my conversations with White House officials, that the president has often lamented that his Justice Department hasn't been bringing charges against senior government officials or really political opponents that he views. He argues behind closed doors to them that charges were brought against him, indictments were brought against him when he was out of office, and that they deserve to have charges brought against them too. And I will point you to someone, I just caught up with a White House official. They are so far waiting to see what the president says on Truth Social, but they did point me to some of what the president said today when he was in the Oval Office with the Turkish President Erdogan. He essentially said, I can only say that Comey is a bad person. He's a sick person. He did terrible things. This is the mindset of the president. He has long viewed Comey as kind of an enemy of his, really. And this is something he has been wanting now for several months since taking office. And you heard Evan talk a lot about Lindsay Halligan, the new top prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia. She was recently put in that role. Part of that is she's a former personal attorney of the president, but she's also a grenade thrower. And I think it isn't a coincidence, of course, that she was just brought into this role and is now the one overseeing this indictment. And so I think it's important to keep all of that context in mind. And then the other thing we do have as well is something that we saw Attorney General Pam Bondi post on X shortly after we learned and reported of this indictment, where she appears to confirm it. She said that no one is above the law and that today's indictment reflects the Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case. So a lot more to come on this, but I can tell you I'm certain that people in this White House behind me, the president, are going to be celebrating this after he's been really pushing this, despite the concerns that we know some people in the DOJ who are handling this have had.
All right, thank you very much. And as Elena was speaking, the United States Department of Justice, both Pamela Bondi, the Attorney General, and the current FBI Director Kash Patel issued a statement in which they describe these charges. Again, we don't have the charging documents, but they describe it. The indictment alleges that Comey obstructed a congressional investigation into the disclosure of sensitive information. And the indictment also alleges Comey made a false statement in violation of the law. And Comey stated that he did not authorize someone at the FBI to be an anonymous source. According to the indictment, that statement was false. Ty Cobb joins me on the phone now. So, Ty, here we are, Evan, putting it so aptly that never in the history of the United States has a director of the FBI been indicted for a crime. Here we are. James Comey has been indicted for 2, lying to Congress and obstruction of justice. I just read how it was described by the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI. What do you see here?
Well, I think this is a tragic day for America, not because Comey's perfect by any means, but what we have here is a clear vindictive prosecution, a clear selective prosecution. We have a president, for the first time in history, ordering his attorney general to indict his enemies, and the attorney general, instead of being the independent force that she's supposed to be, saying, yes, sir, how fast can I get that done for you? I think if she's concerned about justice for people who have misled the country, reflection on her confirmation proceedings is probably in order, because she talked about even-handed justice, and this is not that. I think that the case is subject to motions to dismiss for vindictive prosecution and selective prosecution. I think, likewise, it's a very weak case, at least based on what we publicly know, and we publicly know an unusual amount about this case because of the Justice Department internal Inspector General's investigation, where he found the person that Comey allegedly authorized to leak the information not credible, and found that Comey was credible. So I think this is a very problematic case for the government to bring, but I think the way in which they brought it is problematic for the entire country. And this is either the end of the rule of law in America, or it's a tipping point against the authoritarian activity that we have seen from this president and his attorney general.
In what way would it be a tipping point in that direction, Ty? I mean, I'm just looking at the situation. If you take a step back, you say, well, the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, who said he didn't have enough information to prosecute Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, within days when Trump posted, he's gone, replaced by a Trump personal attorney who has never prosecuted a case in her career. That's who's bringing these charges. So somebody might look at this and say, okay, how could this end up being a tipping point where it goes the other direction? How could that go?
So, I think the groundswell, among the citizenry here, could be enormous. I mean, this is unprecedented. It's what every law student is told is not possible, and what distinguishes us from dictatorships around the world. That the executive branch does not dictate, or the executive leading the executive branch does not dictate to prosecutors who will and will not be charged. Now, we're seeing that as Tom Homan, reaches into his paper bag to spend his $50,000 tonight. He's not being charged. But Comey, who the president has serious problems with, is. I think this is a very, very possible tipping point for Americans to finally acknowledge the people who have been in constant denial about the damage that Trump is doing and the freedoms that are being eroded. I think this is an opportunity for those people to wake up and take it seriously.
So, Ty, I want to play again. At the heart of this, you say we know a lot about it. We know a lot about it because there was a full investigation into what Comey testified to Congress in that Zoom interview, right, when the question was about a leak, right, and a leak that also had been testified on by, at that time, the deputy director of the FBI, Mr. McCabe, who had said that Comey knew about a leak. And Comey had said that he did not know about the leak prior to the leak. He has stuck with this all the way. This has been inspected. But let me just play the exchange with Ted Cruz that may be at the heart of this. But this is the question of what Comey knew about the leak and what he authorized about the leak. Here it is.
On May 3rd, 2017, in this committee, Chairman Grassley asked you point blank, quote, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation? You responded under oath, quote, never.